So this is the Town of Lancaster Conservation Commission meeting of October 22nd, 2024. Call the meeting to order and call the roll. Jim LaValle.
Here.
Dennis Hubbard.
Here.
Carl Fawcett. Carl, you're on mute.
Hey, I'm here.
David Millett.
Here.
And Tom Seidenberg is also here. We have a bunch of continuances, so we'll run through those quickly right now. We have a continued notice of intent for 0 Heritage Lane, construction of a driveway crossing and single-family home. This meeting is being continued. We have a request for continuance to November 12th. Happy to take a motion for that.
Yeah, motion to continue 0 Heritage Lane to November 12th.
I'll second.
All right, motion was made by Jim, seconded by Dennis to continue 0 Heritage Lane to November 12th. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Next up, we have a continued notice of intent for 10 Fire Road 54. We received a request to continue to November 12th. Happy to take a motion for that.
Yep,
I
motion to, go ahead.
I motion to continue it till November 12th.
Second it.
All right, motion was made by Carl, seconded by Jim to continue to November 12th. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Next up on our agenda, we have a continued notice of intent for 121 Fire Road 11. We have a request to continue this meeting to November 26th. Happy to take a motion.
Motion to continue 121 Fire Road 11 till, did you say November 6th?
26th.
26th.
Yep, second that.
Right, motion was made by David, seconded by Jim to continue 121 Fire Road 11 to November 26th. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And next up, we have a continued hearing for request determination of applicability for removal of dead trees within 7 Bridge Road right of way. We have a request to continue this hearing also to November 26th. Happy to take a motion for that.
Motion to continue this RDA for removal of dead trees on 7 Bridge Road to, did you say November 26th?
I did.
November 26th.
I second it.
All right, motion was made by Jim, seconded by Carl to continue the 7 Bridge Road hearing till November 26th. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay. I believe that's the end of our continuances. So next up on our agenda is a continued notice of intent for New England Power Company right-of-way easements, construction of access road improvements, and permanent work paths serving transmission lines. I see several people on the call for this. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello, this is Jen Bonta from TRC, and Erin Wariski from National Grid is also on the call. I would like to say that we, last time we were continued because we had to do some map updates from an October 8th site walk with Brad. He identified 2 locations along the right-of-way that needed to be flagged and added to our plans. One was the wetland replication area, And the second was an extension of wetland GAR 39, which is southeast of structure 213. We have made those additions. We have flagged them in the field as well, and we submitted them via hard copy and online to the commission.
Thank you. Brad, do you have comments?
I'm all set now.
Okay, thanks. Commissioners, any questions or comments? Not seeing any. Any questions or comments from the general public on this hearing? All right, not seeing anything, so I think we're good to close. Yeah, Brad, close and issue an order of conditions, I expect.
Yep, I'll make a motion to close the hearing.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I think that was Carl, so motion was made by Jim, seconded by Carl to close the hearing. Any further discussion? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle. If you said something, Jim, I didn't hear it.
All right, yes, aye.
Dennis Hubbard,
Abstain.
Carl Fawcett,
Aye.
David Millette.
Aye.
Right, that's 401. Dennis isn't a butter. Okay. And then happy to take a motion to issue an order of conditions.
Yep, I'll make a motion to issue an order of conditions.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion was made by Jim, seconded by David to issue the order of conditions. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle,
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard,
Abstain.
Carl Fawcett,
Aye.
David Millette,
Aye.
and Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too. All right, next up on the agenda, we have a continued notice of intent for Zero Hilltop Road, construction of a roadway and utility infrastructure at Zero Hilltop Road. Who do we have on the call to represent this project? I think I saw Matt.
Matt Morrow is here, Mr. Chairman.
Matt, why don't you bring us up to date on where we stand?
Okay, so at this point, what I'm here to bring you up to date on is the wetland delineation. We had gone out last Wednesday and toured the area of the wetland delineation pertaining to the utility rights of way. The only change that was made on that delineation was there was a flag added for clarity's sake at one end of the delineation on the Hawthorne Street side. This past Sunday morning, we went out. That would be myself, that would be Brad Stone, and the third party reviewer Art Allen. And hold on one second, something just my screen just went cuckoo. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Art Allen, the chairman, we all went out and took a look and walked the large portion of the wetland line that was applicable to the project. There were sections over in the back end that aren't currently applicable. Which would be the B. You have an A side and a B side on the wetland delineation. We didn't tour the B side, and the line that starts from 1 to, I believe it was 106. We did not do all of the flags. We did the majority of them, but we ended, I believe, at flag 84, 85. There was one little finger of wetlands that we added on the area from flag 32 coming up around an area that had some hydric soils. Well, the soils had some redoxymorphic features. The soil value was a little bright, but that was, when Art and all of us examined that it was attributed more to the fact that the soils had been overturned years ago, probably from prior logging activities. So there was soils that were mixed in, but there was enough redoxymorphic features and enough hydrology where we added it in. It wasn't like a significantly long section, just came out about 30 feet in one section and just came right back in, tied. We tied it to flag 37. So once we did that, we walked the rest of the line over in the isolated wetland in the C series by flag C31 in the isolated wetland. We found the outlet of a pipe, and it looked like there had been past water flow through it. So we're determining where that source of the pipe is coming from. I know that my client has walked the area, and he thinks he may have found about 100 feet up from the line in the middle of the woods, an opening where the water is coming in. And we're working to verify that. And there was also an area at the beginning where I started flag 1, where the third party reviewer wanted it back out to the street. So we went out to the stone wall, curved back in. That was only a few flags. The vast majority of that line essentially did not change. That's where we are to date. I have survey crews. The engineer has the survey crews going out, relocating those flags. There were a few other flags that aren't noted that had been missing. You know, sometimes the deer eat them or whatever, and we just rehung them in the spots that they were according to plan. So we're having those just respot checked. It doesn't change the line at all. We just hung a couple of flags that were missing. So that's basically where we are at this point.
Okay,
So when it comes to the wetlands, I'm open to any questions or comments.
thank you, Mr. Morrow. Brad?
So I think Matt pretty much summed it up. So we did receive notes from the peer review consultant. The peer review consultant's going to finalize the report once they've made some changes to the plan. But yes, the biggest question, there were minor spots that changed, but the pipe definitely does need to be investigated further. My understanding is there's a history of multiple pipes out there. We found 2. The one that's discussed tonight may certainly be germane to the project. The other one I think is insignificant. But that's one of the pieces of missing information just on the existing conditions. The other thing that I don't think we mentioned just now, but we noticed in the field review as well as on the plans, there is a culvert on Zero Hilltop where the utilities are connecting the project down towards the Hawthorne Lane section. So that should be shown on the plan. The culvert wasn't in great shape, so any construction happening around that is going to need to account for that as well. But for the start, they've got to show it as the existing conditions too.
Thank you, Brad. Just to clarify what Brad said, the culvert is in Hilltop Road in the right of way of the road. Just for people who weren't clear on that.
And also on that pipe too, if I may, Mr. Chairman, real quick,
Sure.
in the isolated wetland section. I haven't gone out to see it yet, but anecdotally from what my client is telling me, they went out and investigated. They did find like a pipe opening about 100 feet upstream in the upland section, where they believe the origin of the pipe is coming from. That's being investigated. If what I'm hearing is accurate, I don't think it's going to be a heavy lift to take that pipe into account. I don't think it's going to majorly impact the project at all, but we will see with what they come up with. Other than that, I really don't have any other comments other than to say thank you for the site walk. Always appreciate a good brisk walk out on a Sunday morning.
It was good weather.
Yeah, it was great.
All right, so commissioners or Brad, does anyone have any further questions or comments at this point? I'm not seeing any from commissioners or Brad. There was one question in the chat. Adam Zan asked that he thought that this hearing was continued. Just to clarify, we had continued the Zero Heritage Lane hearing. This is the Zero Hilltop Road hearing. If I happen to have misspoke when doing that prior continuance, just to clarify, if I had misspoken, I meant to say Heritage Lane. Not sure if I actually said that.
And to add to more of the confusion, I'm actually the one on Zero Heritage Lane too, so that adds to the mirth and merriment on that. Sorry, guys.
So with that, I will open up. Are there any further questions or comments from the general public?
Yep.
I think, Kara, you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank
Kara
you.
Sanford. Please identify
Well,
yourself for the record.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm smiling because Matt, when I look at your screen, I feel like I'm in a Star Trek episode. So I'm so serious for this hearing and it threw me off. So
I apologize. It actually, really quick, the backstory on that is that is the bridge of the Jupiter 2. And there's a bunch of us that are taking that up and leaving it there for a while in tribute to Mark Goddard, who was the pilot of the Jupiter 2. He was a friend of mine, a very dear friend, and he passed away last year. So a bunch of us have been doing that on our Zoom screens in kind of his memory.
Really?
Seriously.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that.
So I'm Kara Sanford. I live very close to this location at 350 Bull Hill Road, and I have a statement. It will take about 3 minutes. It's a letter because I've really thought about this. This is a frustrating site plan. I'm expressing an opinion. This is a frustrating site plan because it does a lot of damage to the biodiversity of the location, yet is designed so that the Conservation Commission has limited influence. Prior to this proposed subdivision, this location has been some of the best interior wildlife habitat in the town. It's been mapped by Mass Fish and Game and the Nature Conservancy and UMass Amherst as a land protection habitat priority for the entire state. It did receive a federal forest legacy funding grant, which people know about. It's extremely competitive, and that was not accepted by the landowner. This site plan goes right to the buffer zone area of what is today an incredible interior habitat pond. That's going to change dramatically with this subdivision. Lawns, stormwater basins, cleared trees, and pets are going to expose that pond and change that interior wildlife habitat forever. I looked at the planning board site plan, and many of the individual houses appear to be set about 12 inches outside of the 100-foot buffer zone. So theoretically, there could be no Wetland Protection Act filing at all because of that. I don't have enough of a sense to be sure. But that presents an issue because a new landowner thinks he or she has a certain acreage to live on when really it's about a third of the parcel. And this is a recipe for lawn encroachment, thereby putting a burden on the Conservation Commission for enforcement. The isolated wetland in the middle of the loop road is really disturbing to me. It's not been evaluated as vernal pool habitat, yet has a proposed road with houses and lawns completely encircling it. That's going to condemn that wetland, if it is a vernal pool habitat, as unusable. The applicant's environmental analysis letter is, in my opinion, misleading in talking about the open space component to the project. When that term is used in a development application, it usually means that the land will be perpetually protected or deeded to the town or to a land trust. Neither is true in this case, so why use the term? I looked at the August 2024 Google Earth aerials that just came out and the DEP wetlands GIS layer, and what is referenced in the environmental analysis letter as open space is essentially the unbuildable part of the tract. Unbuildable because of wetlands and the wetlands blocking access to the further uplands. Personally, it's really hard to witness something bad about to happen to the biodiversity of this incredible location that I've lived next to, and which was the absolute catalyst to me starting my environmental advocacy work as a volunteer in Lancaster and chairing the open space committee in the past. and serving on the Conservation Commission in the past, when I moved here in 2003. I wish this applicant had had it in them to value the biodiversity of the site and designed his plan accordingly. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Mr. Mara, you put your hand up. Did you want to respond?
Yeah, let me just lower my hand here so it doesn't get overly annoying. With regard to the isolated wetland and vernal pool, fair question. So to answer your question, one of the things I did forget to mention, and your comment just reminded me of that, was that I asked Frank McPartland, the engineer, originally when we looked at that isolated wetland, because the area where it is now is actually a lot larger than what was originally flagged 5 years ago. So when I flagged it, it went out larger. So there's more of it out there that we're looking to protect. As far as the vernal pool potential goes, it doesn't hold that kind of water. It doesn't really hold much for water. In fact, it was one of the reasons why I asked Frank to evaluate it as, whether it was an isolated land subject to flooding, which is very specific criterion. The area is just too flat to hold that kind of a volume of water. It holds enough on the surface to create the wetland vegetation, but it would not go anywhere deep enough for the minimum to house vernal pool habitat. That was very apparent to me immediately when I saw it, but I did want the engineer to evaluate it just to back up my thoughts. So I hope that helps to answer that particular question. With regards to Mr. Wells' environmental analysis, I will leave that to Mr. Wells to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mara. Adam Zand, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for clarifying which zero we're talking about. So I am interested that this mention of a pipe is coming up all of a sudden. I guess the initial question would be like, why wasn't this recognized earlier, and why haven't previous sort of engineering teams found this? I would imagine it's pretty hard to find to hide a whatever many year old clay pipe, and I doubt it's just one as well. I guess I'm just wondering where this is all coming from, and then I have a follow-up question about that.
Mr. Mara, you put your hand up. Do you want to answer that question? Mr. Mara, you're on mute.
Yep, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to answer the question. So the clay pipe wasn't spotted before because of the time of year that I was out there flagging it. It was essentially late spring, midsummer, June, early part of June, all the way through late part of July. It took quite a while to flag that area. It was very heavily vegetated. So it was pretty much covered. Now everything's dropped off. It's thinned out. We can see the ground a little bit better. All of us spotted, actually, it was me that spotted the pipe. I was the one that pointed it out to the reviewer. And to, the two other parties that were there, that would be Brad and the chairman. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we do have to examine the nature of where that pipe is coming from, and that is what we're doing. But again, based on what I'm hearing, I'm not sure it's going to be a heavy lift as far as being able to address it. I think we'll be able to readily address that. As far as the chance of any other pipes being out there in the isolated wetland, I would have to say it's zero, because if it was going to be out there, we would have spotted it. And we went over that entire wetland area and the others that we examined with a fine-tooth comb. And we were out there for a good, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, what, Brad, about 3.5 hours? I mean, we were out there most of the morning, examining those wetlands. So I didn't see any other pipe fixtures in that isolated wetland. And, the second we spotted it, I pointed it out. So I hope that helps to answer that question.
I think so. Do you know what the pipe is made of, or were you not able to determine that?
I wasn't sure. It looked like an old iron pipe, could be an old clay pipe. It was partly covered, so it's been there for a long, long time. So it was only half open, but there was evidence that it had water flowing through it.
Yeah, and just because we don't have like the show and tell like we usually do with the planning board, approximately where would the pipe be compared to the construction that's being proposed? Like, would this need to be removed? Would you go around it? Like, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how it all fits together.
The opening of the pipe itself is interior in the wetland between flags C31 and C32. So if you look on if any plans that you have, and you look at that isolated wetland, and you see 31 and 32, that's where it's between. Now, where it goes, I haven't made that determination yet. We're working on that one, trying to figure that out. And that's something I think we'll be able to answer fairly shortly.
I realized I didn't identify myself. So Adams and 202 Hilltop Road, effectively across the street neighbor. And no, thank you for all that. I guess my other question would sort of be to Kara's point, and I'm not saying Google Maps are the most accurate things in the world. I met with the property owner, the person bringing this project before the planning board and the con, and I've got a screenshot with me physically in the middle of a body of water. And I'm just confused with, like, again, I'm not going to reach out to Google and say, what are you guys mapping? But it really is, it's in that middle section that is basically clear right now to the, oh, I don't know, maybe 30 feet from all the trees that have been uprooted. And I'm just confused. Like, again, I'm not saying you guys are working for Google or have expertise, but there is like a blue body of water that I walked through. And I don't know if that's what you're talking about, that it could potentially be vernal. It's too shallow to be vernal. I'm just, just because we're in front of the Concom, I thought it'd be a good time to bring it up, that I theoretically I walk on water. Who knew?
Right, Mr. Mara, you put your hand up. Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, and again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as far as potential vernal pools, the only potential vernal pool that has been marked on that entire property that I've seen on the state maps has been the wetland that goes between the A series and the B series on my flagging. That area has been inspected by Mr. Wells twice, and in examining it, it was shown to have, it was netted and shown to have fish in it. So once you find fish in a body of water like that, its possibility of a vernal pool is automatically eliminated because that doesn't fit the requirements. As far as the isolated wetland that I flagged, it doesn't hold the requisite volume of water. Any other isolated wetlands that are off of the lot have been examined by others, so I'm not privy to the information on those specific wetlands. But as far as potential vernal pools go, the only one that the state's identified has been in the area that I described to you. And I find that the state's mass mapper on potential vernal pools is actually pretty good. That's all I have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mara. Mr. Zand, if you want to share that picture with the commission, we'd be happy to take a look at it. So if we don't know exactly where it is, I'm not sure exactly what value it will have, but we'd be happy to take a look at that.
Yeah, and like I said, Google's not always the most accurate, but I just thought it was strange. And when I met with the property owner and his counsel, like, we were all sort of like throwing up our hands because it's not there right now, but maybe at some point it was. So no, this is super helpful. I appreciate all the answers. I'll pass it over to other people.
All right, we have two more hands up. I think Chris Mahabir was first. Please identify yourself for the record and go ahead.
Hi, this is Chris Mahabir, 679 George Hill Road. I'm a direct abutter. And regarding the pipe, I did want to share that when I purchased the property, I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people in the town who knew about the history of my property, and as well this property that Jim owns now. And there is, from what I've been told, a substantial network of clay pipes that were installed, I believe by the Thayers, to drain that area. And they run from this Hilltop Road location down George Hill, quite a ways. I think that in the effort to, avoid problems in the future, there should be a study to properly map out these clay pipes so that, for example, if they're crushed in the course of construction, whether it's road construction or home construction, all of a sudden that drainage no longer works. And then you have flooding and, obviously, I don't think I don't think Jim wants to have to contend with that later. It's better to understand these things up front. So I wanted to share that that's something I was told, and I think it's worth talking to some of the resources in the town to understand more about the history and to make the effort to map it. It sounds like the fellow who was doing the surveying, did find one, but I've been told there's an extensive network of them. So that's one point. And then regarding vernal pools, obviously, an effort should be made to map them during a period of, kind of a normal year. If I understand right, we've had some dry years and they may have filtered into the actual samples that were provided in the report. So I just think it's best to do a proper mapping, during that time of year when it makes sense to do it, whether that's March, April, so that you have a proper baseline, a proper reference point to then, map out where the rest of the development should be positioned so that it doesn't, have this ecological impact that nobody wants. So those are my only two comments at the moment, and I'll hand it back to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Morrow. You have your hand up, go ahead.
Again, I apologize if I'm monopolizing the conversation. I'm just trying to address concerns from my area of expertise, which is wetlands identification and delineation. So one of the things that we did observe when we were out on site, mapping clay pipes, maybe there may be areas where we may find stuff that might be valuable, like where we found it in the sea area. But when you walk those properties and you walk the interior of that land, the one thing that dawned on me, and it also dawned on the reviewer as well, is that there are two extremes in the topography as far as the wetland goes. It's either flat. So you've got areas that are relatively flat, which makes the delineation particularly challenging. But old guys like us are up to the, we're up to the challenge. The other area is it's either flat or it's totally topo driven as far as the wetland boundary. In other words, you've got a steep slope, goes right down to the bottom of a swampy area. I don't really think that any particular old clay pipes is going to, other than the isolated wetland, which may be the result of a broken pipe, isn't necessarily going to influence the hydrology of the wetlands that are on site, which are pretty extensive, nor of the vast majority of the upland. And that's just from my experience. I'm not an engineer. I don't want to even pretend to be an engineer. So, engineering will look at that particular area, but I'm not sure it would be a very fruitful exercise. But that's from, again, my standpoint. And thank you very much for expressing the concern and for hearing me out.
Great, thank you, Mr. Morrow. Brad, you've got your hand up, go ahead.
Sure. I just want to elaborate on the, see if I can provide a little bit more information with respect to the questions regarding the pipes. So I've heard from some people this evening, as well as I got an email with some information concern about pipes being out there, and being out on site as well and seeing a couple, I can kind of put it into a little bit more perspective. So from what I understand, listening to Butter tonight and some information as well, there's quite possibly a network that heads down towards George Hill Road. And if that's the case, when looking at the existing conditions and the topography, the drainage divide is pretty close to the easterly portion of the proposed subdivision. So for the most part, it's all the off properties immediately to the east that would potentially drain in that area. There's not much, I'd have to look at it a little bit closer, but I don't think there's much of the existing subdivision parcel that ultimately heads that way, most likely. And the two pipes that we did find on site, they actually headed in the other direction, which is what I would anticipate. The other side of that drainage divide heading more towards the northwest. Now there was concern about missing pipes and why didn't we notice that? It's very easy in a pretty large site like that that's overgrown to not stumble on those things. I could tell you if somebody said there was 10 out there, it would take me a very long time to find them, even if you could. So the ones that we did find, one historically looks like it's been functioning, but there's been enough sediment that came right up to the top of it, and the water pretty much has to go to an elevation right at the top of the pipe. It's easy for someone to miss, and the other one we found by chance. But most importantly, the only ones that are ultimately relevant in terms of the project from a conservation viewpoint is how those pipes may be hydraulically connected to a resource area. Certainly the one within the isolated area that we're looking at, that pipe has the ability to change the dynamic of that resource area. It could change it from isolated to a bordering vegetated wetland, for instance. So that matters. But we did look at the wetland delineation. We're pretty confident that we didn't miss wetlands out there. So if there happen to be additional pipes that aren't close to any of those wetland areas, then for the sake of the application before the Conservation Commission, then they likely don't matter. They could matter in terms of, yes, if they're controlling upland water ponding, things of that nature. Yeah, I've seen issues where drainage pipes like that, ultimately you disturb them and it changes the landscape. But those areas, for the most part, aren't going to be within Conservation Commission jurisdiction if they exist. I'm pretty confident that we didn't miss wetland resources out there. And we're looking closer at one that may go from isolated to something more if it does. But I don't think that in general we're missing the boat in terms of the relevance of pipes that may or may not be out there at this point.
Thanks, Brad. Do you think that it would make sense that we have a condition that if pipes are discovered, that we at least have a conversation with the developer, like if they're discovered during construction?
If they're discovered during construction, certainly if the condition is to just have a discussion, I wouldn't be opposed to something like that. Because I could certainly look at it, and if it brings something into jurisdiction that wasn't discovered, we can have a conversation. I just wouldn't want the condition to be there that would control something that would be beyond the control of the board. That's my only concern.
Yep, understood. Okay, thanks. I think you put your hand down, so I'm going to go to the next hand. James House, please identify yourself for the record. Go ahead. You're on mute.
My headset wasn't working. Yeah, this is James House, 495 George Hill Road. I just wanted to bring to the attention of the Conservation Committee the environmental report, the latest one, that one by LAC, it was done on September the 16th, 2024 for the developer. And I wanted to bring to the attention paragraph on page 8. I just read it verbatim here. The forest wetland in the southwestern corner of the site, photo points number 21 and 22, was also completely dry during the site evaluation. This wetland, however, does contain some areas with more substantially sized and deeper confined basin depressions that appear to hold water deep enough for breeding by the wood frog, Lithobates sylvaticus, or the spotted salamander, and by Stoma maculatum, which are vernal pool indicator species. And then it goes on to say, confirmation of vernal pool habitat could not be performed due to the inspection being outside of the spring vernal pool breeding season. So this brings to my attention not only why wasn't the environmental investigation done during spring season, but also why are we looking at mapping out wetlands in the driest part of the year?
Well, the applicant chooses the time that they would like to file. You know, it's certainly a question for the commission as to whether we will require a vernal pool evaluation. I think that's a discussion the commission will have to have once we have the peer review report in hand and detailed comments from our agent. You know, we can have that discussion. I don't think the time is ripe for that discussion. Mr. Maurer, you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to say one more thing too. So when you do your follow-up independent review report, you know, are you going to conduct that in the spring when we have the wettest period to validate what the developer has done?
So we did just have the peer review of the wetland delineation. At this time, we don't have active plans to do further field work, but I think that, you know, the commission hasn't really discussed whether it wants a vernal pool evaluation. I think that we are still waiting on some things. Most particularly the report, a final report of a final review of the project from the conservation agent, the final review of the delineation from our peer reviewer. You know, I think at that point, once we have all that information, I think the commission will have a conversation about what our next steps are. Mr. Maurer, you've got your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that.
Well, just to address the concerns, and thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to respond. The time of year, of course, wetland delineation can be done at most times of year, except when you have like 2 feet of snow on the ground. Don't really want to be going out and doing that. But during the other 3 prime seasons, or if you have a warm winter with no snow, the criteria for evaluating wetlands can be done any time of year. We've evaluated it in the middle of droughts. We've evaluated them in the middle of floods. So it is a technique that is specified by the state and federal government as far as their identification. That was done. That was reviewed by the third-party reviewer, who, with the exception of one very small area that we made an adjustment on that we both agreed to, didn't find it a problem with the wetland delineation. With regard to any potential vernal pools out on site, I mean, we're taking essentially a section of a very comprehensive report that Mr. Wells did on the site. And again, you know, Dan can address the more specifics on it, but my take on his report, and based on my wetland delineation and the areas of his evaluation, any vernal pools that he was citing that might have potential existence would be internal to the wetlands. If they are internal to the wetlands, jurisdiction wouldn't happen on those vernal pools unless the work was taking place in the wetland. If we spotted areas where there were potential vernal pools that were isolated, then it will go into local jurisdiction. But I've zigzagged throughout that entire site over the course of months this season. And outside of those wetland areas, I don't think we're going to find anything, at least not in my area, that would I would consider as any potential vernal pools. I think the areas that Mr. Wells was referring to would be internal to the existing wetlands on site. So just wanted to bring that to the commission's attention. It's always good to identify vernal pools, but if they're interior to wetlands and it's not going to wind up making a difference as far as the project goes, just thinking of productive uses of time. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Merrill. Mr. House, do you have more questions or comments?
Yeah, it's just a similar sort of thing, a follow on from what I was talking about. The salamanders are very difficult to find. Normally, they'll only come out during times when it's either, because they stay in their holes, they normally come out when it's times of heavy rain and they get forced to the surface, or during breeding season. So if you do have any keystone species in that area, you're not going to find them basically unless you do your survey at the right time, which is going to be during breeding season or after there's been a heavy rainstorm. You're certainly not going to find them basically at the driest part of the year. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Kara Sanford, go ahead.
Thanks. So 350 Bull Hill Road, I'm supporting Mr. House's comment too, because this is a dramatic site plan when you look at the whole picture. The effect when you look at the general idea of mitigation and the general effect of that development on that back pond area. And just like when you look at an elephant and you only, like 2 feet away from you, you don't really see the whole picture. We don't have any of the individual notice of intents on the houses. The site plan in front of the planning board seems to suggest that a lot of those houses in their impact is going to be right outside the buffer zone or potentially a little bit in it. So in terms of gathering information, even if there is a vernal pool within a wetland, we don't know what's being proposed in the future for those NOI lots. And it goes back to my point that I do believe this is a surgically presented site plan to minimize the larger picture of overall impact. The precautionary picture and the burden of proof is on the applicant on that really special habitat. So I support Mr. House 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. Kendra Dickinson, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Kendra Dickinson, 402 Oatman Way, speaking as a private resident. My question would be, back when this site plan was originally approved by a prior planning board, were these issues also brought to front? And as much as I embrace environmental stuff, there's no pictures. Maybe we need a study. And if somebody's really passionate about preserving the area, make an offer to buy the land.
So to answer your question, the subdivision has not been before the commission as a formal filing, to the best of my knowledge. 3 or 4 years ago, the planning board did refer a proposed flexible subdivision plan to the commission for the commission's comments. But since the commission didn't have a formal notice of intent, we didn't do a deep review. We had a discussion and basically just punted it back to the planning board.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. Are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none. I do believe we have several items outstanding, Mr. Marrow. So I assume that you would like a continuance. Before we go to that point, Brad, do you have a list of action items of homework, if you will, for this hearing?
So just to bring the commission a little bit more up to speed too. And one quick thing I wanted to mention while people are here that express concerns. There was one point brought up about potential lot construction being outside the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction with a house being literally a foot outside the buffer zone, things of that nature. So, the reason a lot of times people get to the Conservation Commission is due to people like myself in the agent position. We're not ignoring construction in town, and forcing people to and not forcing people to go when appropriate. Sometimes applicants file knowing they need to go, but a lot of times we pick up on things and advise people, inform them that they need to go before the commission with an NOI. Something like a house being just outside the buffer zone. Well, we know from construction that you have to do site grading and other things for that. So it's not going to escape commission review because of just a foundation. So my main point in bringing something up like that is if there is anything that is going to be within the commission's review, or we have concerns with construction that's going to go beyond the scope of this notice of intent, it's not going to go unnoticed internally within the municipal office building. I keep in close contact with the planning director as well as the building commissioner. So I hope I can at least give the public a little bit more confidence there that we are reviewing things and not just relying on what's being submitted to the board. So if something needs to be done in the future beyond the scope of an application, we'll make sure it goes in that direction. In terms of this filing before the commission right now, I have spoken as recently as today with the project engineer, as well as I wanted to be a little bit more active with the planning board proceedings as well. They do have a peer review consultant looking at the design for them. I've had some back and forth with the peer review consultant. I've picked up on some things that they may not have, as well as they've quite possibly picked up on things that I might not have. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for us to all be communicated on that end for the benefit of the applicant as well, because I can tell you from the applicant side of the table, when I used to represent applicants, there's nothing more frustrating than going between two different boards and hearing different opinions on the same topic, for instance, stormwater in this case. So my goal is to do a complete my review. We did get a revised set of plans that we've had for about 6 business days now. So I've been going through that, come up with my comments, and hopefully speak with the applicant's representative, the planning board's peer reviewer, and then just get everybody on the same page, because one of the concerns we've had from the beginning is that the planning board may be getting different information from the Conservation Commission or vice versa. So to help things move quicker and more smoother, we've had some discussions on making that end of it work. So yes, we still have quite a bit to look at in terms of the engineering review. I'm fairly confident that we've addressed or will be able to, in a short term, address most of the concerns regarding the wetland delineation, vernal pools, pipe networks, things like that were discussed on site. I'm less concerned with that at this point and more concerned with the engineering design itself, but we are still working on it.
All right, thanks, Brad. So is it clear what everyone's homework is at this point? So Brad, if I could restate what I believe where we stand, I think that you're still planning on writing a more detailed comment letter for the commission. I believe that we are going to get an updated set of plans based on the site walk that we had. I believe that pipe needs to be located. That needs to be placed on the plans. So I think those three things at least are outstanding. I don't know if there's more on the list or more detail you want to go into. I want to make sure we're all on the same page on what information we're expecting.
All right, so I can tell you from discussion with the design engineer today, there's more concerns in what we talked about this evening with respect to the engineering design. But I'm confident that we'll be able to have discussion with them and make the necessary changes. So I did not do a comment letter for the commission, knowing that this was kind of a little bit of a dynamic process, and I wanted to get ahead of what I just mentioned, potentially hearing conflicting things in front of two boards. So I reached out to the peer review consultant, design engineer. Hopefully we can get together and come up with a better plan to address everyone's concerns, in a uniform kind of front. But my reason for not doing a comment letter is knowing that the plan, yes, there was going to be a revision. My goal is to hit the major points, the concerns I have, talk it through, and do a comment letter once we get that anticipated revision. I still anticipate doing comments for the applicant, at least getting them my concerns and that information as I deem fully appropriate. But as that's more of a working process, I think once I get those concerns known to them and they give me a revised set of plans, then I'll do a comment letter for the commission's benefit if there's anything still outstanding with the design that I see at that point. But knowing what's before the commission now is going to get revised. I did not, and still needing time to review it, I did not do a comment letter for the commission at this point.
Okay, great. So if there are no further comments or questions from the commission, I think we're looking at a continuance. Mr. Marrow, would you like to ask for a continuance? Our next meetings are November 12th and November 26th.
Yes, please. November 12th.
Okay. Happy to take a motion to continue to the 12th.
I'll make a motion to continue our notice of intent hearing for 0 Hilltop Road to November 12th.
I'll second.
All right, motion was made by Dennis, seconded by David to continue to November 12th. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle,
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard,
Aye.
Carl Fawcett,
Aye.
David Millett,
Aye.
and Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next up, so that finishes our public hearings. Next up on our agenda, our discussion items. First up is discussion of the enforcement order for 397 Center Bridge Road. Brad, want to give us an update?
Sure. So I think within just a few days after the last commission meeting, I was able to touch base with the consultant that's been retained to work for the property owner. So I'm confident that yes, someone is working on this at the moment. I think at the last meeting, the most current update I had at that point was I suspect someone is, from what I've heard, but I have confirmed that. I don't have any information from them at this point other than where they told me they were at in the process of doing their work. I will reach out to them between now and in the next meeting 3 weeks from now to see if they've got any information for us before the next meeting. But yeah, I can confirm somebody's working for the owner at this point on trying to resolve that.
Great. Commissioners, any comments or questions?
No, just that's good news.
No, glad progress.
Okay, so next up on our agenda, general discussion regarding updating the wetlands protection bylaw. So Brad, when we brought this up last meeting, you had expressed some concerns that we're kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. So I was kind of hoping we could have maybe an overview discussion about how we want to proceed, and maybe a timeline of maybe we could put in some targets. If we're going to do bylaw updates, if we work this backwards, if we shoot for the town meeting in May, then we really need to have language done 2 months before then so that we can go through the full process. We're going to have some public hearings, assume at least a continuance. If there's any kind of comments and we want a revision, we're going to need to draft a warrant article that's going to have to go to the select board for inclusion in the warrant. So I feel like if we are going to undertake any activity in updating the bylaw, we really want to have all our ducks in a row to have that discussion no later than February, right? Like be ready to have the meetings where we talk about the language in February so that we can get on the warrant. If you think that we're going to have too many things to do between now and then maybe we should target a different time, but I'm kind of hoping that we have enough time to at least address some of our top level concerns. What do you think?
So on my end, I'm a little hesitant committing to dates just on for personal reasons, because I'm still feeling out my day-to-day function of the position. One of the things I'm struggling with in not being able to commit to times for certain things is it's taken me by far a lot longer to look and investigate a question or a project, something either coming or been in existence in the past, without having that institutional knowledge. Lately, what used to take me 5 minutes in other communities can take me 2 hours or more easily. So that's one of the issues I'm struggling with, at least on a personal level, in terms of trying to map out timeframes for things like revising bylaws, and the conservation one isn't the only one that I think that our municipal department needs to revise. There's others as well. We have other upcoming things like the open space and recreation plan that needs to be done. So before committing to something, I'd want to have a little bit discussion with the director in my department, just so I have a better understanding of everything that he may anticipate I've got coming down the pipeline for myself. The other thing is this hasn't gone off my radar, and before I got revised plans for Hilltop and other things, I had a very brief break of about one to 2 days at most, where I started looking at this and just started thinking about the problems we've had in what we're trying to correct, and having seen different bylaws in other communities and been involved with writing them. The one thing that struck me as unique, and I think back to that one project that we're dealing with in trying to figure out what really is developed area, for instance, none of the other bylaws that I've seen, haven't started to pull ones from places I've been, others in central Mass, and before I start looking beyond here, they don't have that exemption in the bylaw. So there isn't a cutoff date of 2007 in our instance, and then saying, okay, anything after that this applies, anything before that this applies. Where they want to try to be less, for argument's sake, more sympathetic to existing homeowners or property owners, for instance, the bylaw gives the commission gives them the discretion to consider things that might be a land taken, for instance, or other matters. But it doesn't try to define different land features or things like that that might make something exempt from the bylaw. And from my perspective, in seeing where we're struggling and where we could potentially struggle, that's the biggest problem in the bylaw as a starting point, and how we want to fix that. For instance, is there, do we maybe want to try to get rid of it, or keep the 2007 date, but instead of a developed area, have some sort of different language. I just think that trying to anticipate anything that you could run into for a pre-existing property, for instance, is really hard to predict. And from the environmental perspective, when you think about the point of creating these bylaws, whether you had a property that had a home or a lawn or something different at one point, it still deserves protecting if it happened to be there pre-bylaw. So there's nothing that requires that you have to have that there. I think that the other ones that I've seen that try to address a scenario that really constrains somebody from doing something with what they have has language that gives the commission discretion to, allow them to do things based on their specific circumstance, which is really, what the Wetlands Protection Act is in general. The Wetlands Protection Act doesn't define, okay, if you have a house X feet from a wetland, you can do it. If you don't, you can't. A lot of the resource area impacts are ultimately at the discretion of the approving authority. So that's kind of what limited time since the last meeting I've had to think about it. And what I had started to do was to pull different communities' bylaws, look at the definitions, because we struggle with our definitions, but also to see what they've included or excluded. Now, if there's nothing, we'd simply note that. But anything that kind of falls into the exemption category, pre or post bylaw or something else, for instance. And I've started cutting and pasting and putting that into a document. So at some point I can at least, rather than give all the commission members, okay, here's 30 conservation bylaws from surrounding communities, have at it, go read it. I'm trying to cut and paste how they're addressing some of the situations, the problems we're running into, and given that limited information to ultimately to the commission at some point, so you can see and kind of decide if there's a better way from taking what's existing and out there of addressing the concerns that we have. So I haven't had a lot of time to think about it, but I just wanted to make that point because, as I started thinking about that 2007 cutoff date and the exemptions, is there a better way to try to solve what's there? Ultimately, though, I wasn't here in 2007, so I don't know the history behind it. So if there was a lot of pushback from the public, if it had failed to go through a town meeting or multiple town meetings before it got to the point where it finally got approved, well, that's a different story. Then I would say, maybe forget what I just said and try to go back to a different plan. But that's kind of one of the thoughts I had, at least.
All right. Thanks, Brad. So I'm not sure what the next step is. So is the next step to wait for you to have the time to work on this a little bit? Or is there some way that, members of the commission can help with that process? Right. So, I'm certainly willing to put some time into, a targeted goal. So if you don't have the time to do something because of your other duties in town, I'm certainly willing to take direction, and, you know, with a particular goal in mind, and see if we can move this forward. If you want to be in control of that, I think that's fine. But I am going to want to see something in you know, I want to have some understanding of when we could see something to talk about, right? So I'm fine either way.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not suggesting, nor am I saying I'm interested in taking control. If commission members want to, you know, if I could make a suggestion, so the bylaws that I'm looking and searching for and trying to compare to ours, and like I said, not recreate the wheel. If there's a way to take something that's out there that solves our problem, that's ultimately what I'm looking at right now. So if rather than me do all the legwork when I have time and kind of, you know, prepare a document to give to the commission to make a suggestion based on what I'm seeing, anyone can simply go out there and you know, it's very easy to find these things on community websites. You know, again, the areas I'm focusing on are the definitions, how they start with that, and anything that they have for exemptions. A lot of what you'll find, I'll tell you up straight, is, you know, stuff that was based on the MACC model at one point. Even some of the more recent ones, I can tell you are, because they neglected to remove some of it and make the revisions as the Wetland Protection Act has been updated. So some communities that went through it in more recent years didn't update from the model and kind of fix some of the things there. But yeah, that's, you know, I think if anyone has time, that would be a good starting point. And certainly anything else that you want to think about and brainstorm through. So my only concern was trying to take what we have and trying to better define what I think everybody agrees has some problems, in anticipating covering all the scenarios. Some we know because we've seen, some we can't anticipate. I just think that you know, pre and post bylaw cutoff it struck me, the more I thought about it, it struck me as unique. I hadn't seen it before. It's certainly there for other types of bylaws. You know, where I think it might be more applicable, but from an environmental bylaw, whether it's stormwater, conservation, or the state updating theirs, you know, you don't typically see cutoff dates for existing activity. You know, you might see cutoff dates in the act for things such as when they started addressing, you know, detention areas or things like that, you know, when that had to be created before they deemed it, you know, something is looking at a wetland versus now if it becomes wetland, it's not, you know, there's dates in there for those things, but there isn't, but every other incremental I've changed that quite frankly does impact properties, whether you have existing facilities there or not. There isn't any type of, you know, grandfathering or other things in that particular instance. So that's just, you know, one of the thoughts I had, and that struck me as a possible option of, is there a way to either eliminate that or come up with something different rather than trying to describe, define landscape features that you find may or may not be important pre or post bylaw kind of thing. So I think by looking at what other communities have done, if you find something that might meet the goals here, we can incorporate it. You know, all the bylaw work I've done in the past, I'm always in favor of taking something what someone else has done and making it work for wherever I am. And if there's something more that needs to be added, can discuss what needs to be added. But I think there's pretty good resources out there based on what's there to see if we, you know, like or don't like things that are in other places, and more importantly, see if it fixes what we think might be the recent problems we've run into. So no, I don't think that I necessarily have to drive the bus on this. I've expressed my concerns about committing to it, and maybe I can provide more information for the commission by the next meeting on that. But no, I think that there's people on the commission that have had great thoughts on this, so I don't have any reservations about suggesting that you go out and do some homework yourself. And if you want to bounce things off of me while I'm in the office between meetings or something, we can. I'd be happy to discuss it. And then we can discuss it formally at, the commission meetings as well.
Okay. Kara, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk. I'm getting my visual up. So I was one of the authors of the wetland bylaw in 2006 and 2007, along with a couple of others, including the conservation agent. And we did the best at the time that we knew to do. And I can say from my recollection, and I was pretty involved with it, that candidly, we were really worried that it wouldn't even pass. And it did pass at town meeting vote by 7 votes. So as with anything, you just gain experience and knowledge, and you learn the nuances and ramifications of things through time. It's like if you grow up. And I feel like I've grown into seeing some of these things or realizing things. So I think any area of ambiguity in the wetland protection bylaw that we have by others who have more experience, and your practical experience would be welcome, whether it's this or anything else in the bylaw. We did the best that we could, but I do recall that our main motivator at the time was just getting the thing a chance to pass, to be really candid about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Jim, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So Brad, would you suggest that we email you some findings and you collate them? How would you like us to proceed? Yeah.
You could certainly do that. I'd welcome any information. If you want to discuss over the phone, you want to email me things. But like I said, I've been looking for, my first thing was, is there something similar to what we have? Because that was my kind of eureka moment. Like I haven't run into this simply because I didn't think it's out there. And that was, kind of like the brainstorm I had. So looking at everything that's out there, yeah, if there's something that you come up with that might be a fix, absolutely. We can discuss it as a group formally. But if there's something you see and you like it or don't like it, but you're not quite sure and want to discuss, I think that certainly makes a lot of sense too. If I think that's where it probably makes more sense to contact me ahead of time. If you see something you absolutely love and you're sure of what it says and you think it might work for Lancaster, then that can more or less be brought directly to the group, let's say. But other things, yeah, like I said, I'd be happy to discuss with anyone as we go through this. I don't want to. I know how important this is. I don't want to slow this down by any means. So whatever anybody thinks can help speed it up, I'm open to it. We'll make myself available as much as possible. I can say, looking at other bylaws that I know I need to work on as well. The stormwater bylaw in town, that has me even more concerned than the wetlands protection one, because that one can actually cause the town harm at some point, because what's in there doesn't meet the minimum requirements under the federal MS4 permit, for instance. So if we can't hold applicants to the minimum standards of the town's general permit, then the town's at risk of not being able to comply with that at some point. So, I do have some priorities to think about as well. Something that, not that the commission wants to hear this, but correcting the wetland bylaw at this point isn't putting the town at harm with compliance necessarily. So I do want to prioritize everything that's going to be on my plate in the near future, which is simply why I'm hesitant to saying today when I could commit to something, but I do hope to have more information by next meeting at least.
Thanks, Jim. Dennis?
Yeah, I would just like to challenge the board that I really think we should shoot to have something up by the next town meeting. It might not be all inclusive. Maybe it's only one section. You don't necessarily have to take it, bite the apple all at once. But there's definitely some low hanging fruit. Pardon the horrible cliche. But I think there's room for improvement. I think we should be able to work to get something. And if at the end of the day it needs a little bit more time, then we can push to the next meeting. But I'd like to challenge us to at least have something to recommend changes for the next warrant.
Thanks, Dennis. Any further comments or questions? All right, moving on. Next item on the agenda, more discussion about regarding oversight of open space parcels. So I haven't done anything on this in the last 2 weeks. I don't know if Brad, if you've done anything on this either. We haven't really discussed it. Is there an update on the open space and recreation plan? I know that there were supposed to be some discussions at some point in the office about that. Do we have any update there?
I don't have an update on that at this point now.
Okay. What is the commission's role going to be in the open space and recreation plan? Do we participate in that process, or is that driven by another board? Or just by staff? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, who is writing that? Who's drafting that?
Yeah, so that's something I can't answer to the commission tonight. But I can talk to staff about that and maybe try to get an answer the next meeting.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about with respect to that is, well, so I have a couple of things. So we've talked briefly in the past about understanding the trails that are on Concom land and making Concom land accessible, like either through, a couple of parking spaces, signage, etc. So I don't know if that kind of thing belongs in the open space and recreation plan. But there's also the CPA funding that is available to the town. So I'm the representative to CPA for Concom. We just had our last meeting last week on Thursday. And as of yet, there are no applications for CPA funding in town. So, I basically have on my to-do list trying to find ways for the commission to spend CPA money, like certainly historical commission, library, recreation committee, they've all proposed and had projects funded by CPA. I think there's no reason why, if we can get our ducks in a row, why we couldn't submit proposals to CPA to establish a small parking area for any of our properties that are currently not accessible, or that kind of thing, or blaze trails, put up signage. I don't know if we could get signage funded by CPA, because CPA didn't buy any of our properties, so I don't think we can do signage, but we certainly can use CPA funds to establish trails. We could use CPA funds for recreational purposes. So in something that would enable the usage of our properties for recreation, we could do that. But the CPA's timeline is pretty short. If the commission wanted to propose a project, we basically only have a month, because CPA has a long process to bring those projects to town meeting, because ultimately they need to be brought to town meeting for the funding to be approved. Now, I think the timing is probably a little too short for us to actually come up with the ideas, understand them, obtain basic quotes, and fill out the application in time to meet the CPA deadlines for annual town meeting. But we probably could do it and target a fall meeting. So I think we need to be understanding that, and that's part of why this item is on our list. But thinking more broadly with respect to the open space and recreation plan, if you look at a map of the parcels that Concom holds, you could almost envision that it's possible to connect them all north to south, at least up through Cook. So we have the Eagle Ridge Conservation Area, which will be extended by the Hawthorne Lane Conservation Parcel. You're not very far from there to get to the town forest. I was actually very disappointed on the Hilltop subdivision where they took the open space away, because that would have actually made that connection much closer. We've got the Forest Legacy parcels, some of which I don't think will be open to public access, but I think that those bring us even closer to then the Ponacan. So it will extend the Ponacan parcel and bring us closer to Cook. And you can almost envision that there's, with just a couple of gaps of a quarter mile or less, we almost have a greenway fully north-south in Lancaster. And I know Capital Group has previously proposed trail network as part of their sweetener to enable development on their 400 acres. It might be within reach that we could have a a trail network that reaches almost completely north to south in Lancaster. And I'd like to see something like that put as a goal in the open space and recreation plan. Because I think we're pretty close. So I don't know, Brad, if you have comments on that, if that's something that actually belongs in that plan, or if even that goal is a sensible goal for the commission to pursue.
Yeah, so again, I think I might have mentioned it before. So I have been involved with these in the past. I didn't lead the group on these plans. I was a participant as a conservation agent. Where I've been before, the process has been largely driven by the town planner and or consultant working for the town in those places. So I am not 100% aware of everything that we should, can, or would do under this. I have my thoughts on it, but I would say I would reserve those until I know more about the direction Lancaster wants to go, beginning with the planning director and from there. But I hope to have some information at the next meeting. At least it's going to be my goal is to try to get you some on that. So rather than speculate what's going to be in it or not going to be in it, things like that. I have the desire to get going on this myself. I do have a question for the commission while we're here tonight, specific to an open space parcel, but as my own need to get that institutional knowledge of what we have in town, working on the open space and recreation plan is a great place to start doing that. We can tap people for their knowledge, as well as I'll gain my own knowledge of everything we got going through that, and I can better respond to all these inquiries that I'm getting. Just within the past week, I've got in like 3 or 4 regarding open space that I just can't answer without doing a lot of research trying to get into it. So at least on my level, I want to get the town moving on that as soon as we can, and I'll see where the director is with that and try to get you an answer for next meeting.
All right, thanks, Brad. Carl, you got your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, do we have a map with all the trails? I know you sent me that list which shows like where they are on the map. But do we have a map that can start with, or is that something that needs to be created too? For people to
So-
use the trails?
So we do have a map on our website. I don't know how accurate it is. That's really my first question is how accurate is it? There are also trails that are visible on, say Mass Mapper. It certainly shows trail networks throughout town, including on private property. So I don't know the status of those trails. They're mapped, but I don't know what rights the general public might have to actually use those trails. I don't know how real those trails are.
Right,
Um,
and the land preservation group has trails too.
Yes, I'm sure the land trust has
Yeah,
trails.
land trust, I mean, yeah. So it seems to be nice to put it all in one place, so you could know where the trails and the conditions of them, know what you have to work with. I mean, is that something the CPA could basically help fund of doing inventory and updating the maps?
Yeah, I don't know if we could use CPA funding to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can raise that question with the committee and see. So the CPA money is well, I wouldn't say very narrowly focused, but you can only spend it for certain purposes. So recreation is one of those purposes, and it's one of the wider ones. So you can use the money to acquire, to support, to create. I forget the full list of verbs, but basically you need to make sure that it's in a valid category and, for lack of a better description, a valid verb. And so the CPA committee, when it receives an application, will verify that it actually meets the requirements of CPA. I don't know if funding a study to verify the trails or verify parcels, verify bounds, I don't know if we would be able to use CPA money for that kind of thing. I'm positive we could use CPA money to establish trails. For sure, that's definitely clearly allowed under the recreation. I don't know if
Right.
that answers your question, Carl.
No, I think it does, and I would think the land trust would, I'm gonna talk to them, but I would think they would apply for CPA money to help finally get the Cook parking lot functional. I know they're doing some work, but it seems like that's kind of been this on a slow boat for a long time.
Yeah, I don't think we can use CPA money for that project.
No,
No, because that parcel wasn't acquired with CPA funds, we're not allowed to use the CPA funds to maintain it. You can use CPA funds for well, I don't know for general maintenance, but you can use CPA funds for improvements on properties that were acquired with CPA money. But if it's just, town land, it would need to qualify under a different bucket. Like historical preservation, you could certainly spend money to maintain a historic property.
right, okay.
Chairman,
Carrie, sorry, Alex, I'll come to you after Kara's had her hand up for a while. Kara Sanford, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I do because years ago, I restarted the Open Space Committee and Recreation Committee. And I'm saying this because there hadn't been anything for a very long time. So I started from scratch. And we had a really great committee. Long story short, we learned a lot through that process, and it was a very active committee. And we learned how to write an open space and recreation plan. And it's a plan that's approved by the state where you need a very set format. And my experience, and it's been several years, is that some towns you can hire a consultant. you have to have so many public hearings and things like that. Sometimes there's an actual committee, which Lancaster does not have at this point and hasn't had for several years. Or sometimes the planning director does it. I mean, and I think one thing, my voice is really dry. One thing that might be helpful, and this is something I haven't myself read, is to somewhere in that planning office is going to be the most current open space and recreation plan, to look at that, because you're following a very precise Department of Conservation and Recreation mandated format where you are required to inventory everything. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel for just like what's our current state of knowledge, that would be worth looking at. I personally am cautious about getting too involved with the town stuff because I'm burnt out with a bunch of other things, but I would certainly be willing to help a little bit and to just share some of my experience with this. Because if you do have an open space and recreation plan, you are eligible for a bunch of different kinds of funding, which are a lot of work to even try to get. But part of the Thayer Field project is because of that funding. So if that's helpful at all, but just looking at that plan, they should have done all that. They should, at the time that it was approved, they should have done a lot of the mapping, and hopefully some of the goals that the commission might have would be reflected in that open space and recreation plan. And to your point, Tom, you know, it all comes down to the people available to do the work, because it's great to have an idea, but it's a totally other thing to do the work to try to have it happen. But Lancaster has all this land, but there hasn't been the next step of a mechanism for people to use it and be familiar with it. Because you can go to a lot of other towns, including, you know, like all our surrounding towns, and there's great trails, and people can engage with the land more. So that seems like a really important aim, to just start with something and have that be visible. So thank you.
Oops, I was on mute. That was stupid. Alex Turner, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Seidenberg. You would know more about the details of the CPA and its limitations. But as somebody who's involved in the land trust project at the Cook parking lot, our goal was, you know, to help increase ADA accessibility and improve the parking as far as the environmental impacts in that area. I know that CPA's money has been used at the beach and at their field and so on. So maybe they fall under some other sort of exemptions. But like Kara, I would offer help should you need to try to figure out a project that is more appropriate if that one isn't, or help doing things, because it does sound like you've got a lot on your plate.
Thanks. Carl Fawcett, go ahead.
Did you say that Zero Hilltop, the open space there won't be given to the town? If that development goes through, that open space, who manages it?
So the open space was removed from the subdivision plan, from the definitive subdivision plan. So yeah, so there was a substantial open space parcel on the preliminary plan, but that was removed.
Okay. So then the landowner is the one that would manage that, and
Well, it's not proposed to be open space or conserved in any way in the current plan.
right, okay.
Okay, so I do actually see that the 2017 open space and recreation plan is on the town website. So I guess I'll review that again, just to refresh my memory exactly what goes in it. And then I think, Brad, if you have some comments or some updates from the planning director for next meeting, that'd be great. If not, we'll look forward to when we do get some idea of what what our role will be, if any.
Understood.
Any other comments or questions about this topic?
I had a couple of questions regarding open space parcels if the commission
Sure,
has time.
go ahead.
One of them was brought to my attention today. So I'll see if I can share my screen. Okay, is the commission seeing the GIS map now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So this is on Sterling Road. So you've got George Hill Road on one side, Sterling down towards the south. This area, as I pan out here, this highlighted is the open space parcel that the Conservation Commission controls. And there was an appraiser looking at a residential property along Sterling Road. I don't recall exactly which one, that's not too important, but they had the question regarding the open space piece and what activity actually happens there. They thought it might be DPW use or something else. And what I noticed, at least looking at the aerials in terms of history and the deed and things of that nature, it looks like the commission acquired it around 2005, but there's a structure on the parcel right around here that didn't go up until 10 years later. So I don't know the history there and what is being used. I also noticed that looking through the aerials, there may be some potential. I plan, just to let the commission know, I plan to do a site visit anyway. But I have concern about what's on the ground, things of that nature. But if it's not a town use, I think we need to be aware. But the other thing, looking at, let me see if I
So
can get a,
before we move on, Brad, I can explain what that is.
okay,
So that's the sugar house that's run by the Scouts. So the Scouts have a sugar maple plantation in that area that is permitted by the commission. In fact, we just ratified that use recently in the last 8 months. If you weren't there for that ratification, then it was just before you joined the town. So those trees actually just reached maturity this year. So the Scouts came before us and we gave them permission to tap those trees for the first time. And my understanding, although I've never visited that structure, my understanding is that's where they actually boil the sap to produce the maple syrup.
Yeah, it is. I've been there. Yeah.
So I don't know, the original, how the original permission was granted. I will say that the previous chair of the commission, several chairs ago, was involved with the Scouts. And I don't know if the commission voted, 15 years ago to officially allow the Scouts to use that property for that purpose. I wasn't participating in the commission then, and of course we don't have online any meeting minutes from back then. So I assume that the commission approved of that use at that time, and in any event, the commission reapproved of that use like 8 months ago. So I asked the Scouts to come before the commission. We discussed the project. They asked for permission, and I asked the commission to formally approve that usage.
Chairman Seidenberg,
Yep, go ahead.
sorry. This is Alex Turner. I was on the commission at that time. And that land was all given to the town from Eagle Ridge in exchange for their density. At the time, sorry, I'm losing my voice. At the time that they decided to plant the plantation, Ken Raposa, who was not involved with the commission at that time, came to us, and at the time Peter Farmer was on the commission and proposed that we allowed to vote to give the scouts permission to plant the trees. And we did. It went to the selectmen for approval as well. I believe that land is also leased for hay up farther up the same parcel, but at the top of George Hill Road. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Alex. So Brad, does that answer your question on that parcel?
Yeah, I mean, it gives me two things I may want to look into just a little bit further for my use. You know, the most recent part is the lease, the potential lease agreement that's there for the haying as well. Because looking at the northern section of the property, I did pick up on that. Clearly, somebody is maintaining it. And it did strike me as possible agriculture use there. So, and that's kind of the thing that I'm looking for when I see something other than the town actively doing things on a parcel. You know, if there is some type of agreement in place. Scouts, I'm not unconcerned, but I'm a lot less concerned. For instance, you know, it's different than a commercial operation on conservation land, for instance, where it may more or less be educational scouting activity kind of thing. But if there's a structure there and other things, something that may have needed to be permitted through the building commissioner, I just want to make sure that the town's oversight is there and that everybody involved with it's done what needs to be done in that instance. That's all. So I'm glad everybody had that knowledge because I'm a lot less concerned now than I was coming here. So thank you.
Sure. I think you had another question. Was it the haying or was it something else?
No, this is I don't have unfortunately I did leave my notes on this in the office, and again this was I think yesterday I got a voice message from somebody asking a question about a couple of other parcels besides this one in terms of does the Conservation Commission allow hunting on them? So my question to the commission is, you know, have we set policies allowing or not allowing things like that on different parcels that we know of that I should be looking for information on? Historically, when it comes to hunting, where I've ever been, you know, I defer to any state statute as well as anything local through zoning, particularly that the police department might know of, for instance. Um, Most commissions I've been involved with don't, you know, further restrict it, for instance, beyond state statute. So do we have anything where we've made note and record of we don't allow certain activities at certain parcels for whatever reason that I can start looking for and trying to put together? And this would go, you know, ultimately into something like the open space and recreation plan as well. But that's kind of like one of the general things that eats up on my time without that institutional knowledge is trying to research and gather that information. So if we've got anything specific to hunting, please let me know. Or, you know, if you have time at some point, and I don't want to tie up anyone else's time tonight unnecessarily, but if there's other things you've discussed that you're aware of with open space parcels, you know, things like the scouts, we allow scouts at this other parcel or something like that, or we have these types of restrictions that we voted on in the past, things of that nature. But for the immediate question in front of me for this week, if you have any knowledge of any action with respect to local hunting. If you get any information there, please share it.
So I'm not aware of any rules and regulations that the commission has established. So in my time on the commission, we've never discussed rules and regulations for the commission's parcels. And that's one of the reasons why this item is on the agenda, is that my hope is that the commission will enumerate its rules and regulations for usage of its parcels. So having said that, I think that we probably will have different rules and regulations for different parcels. In part because, for one thing, when the town forest comes under the commission's jurisdiction, like, I think that, so I don't actually know, but I suspect that people do hunt on the town forest property. I don't know if the town forest committee had previously established rules and regulations, but I think that it would make sense for the commission to maintain whatever rules and regulations the forest committee had when those parcels transfer to us. But if there is an established set of rules and regulations, I don't know what it is because we haven't talked about it in my 6 years on the commission. Jim has his hand up. Maybe Jim remembers something before my time.
No, so I've been on the commission a little longer than you, Tom, and I can't remember ever talking about hunting on a conservation parcel. The only thing that we did vote on was snowmobiling in Cook, and we disallowed it. We said no.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think that we need to establish rules and regulations. I think commissioners, if you have thoughts, please send them to Brad, and maybe Brad can compile from his past experience what a good list of rules and regulations might be. I do think that some of our parcels have explicit restrictions in their deeds. Now, whether those restrictions remain valid at this time, given that the state at some point in the past 50 years, I think they passed a law that cut off deed restrictions at 30 years unless renewed. I don't know if any of those restrictions would still apply to some of our older parcels. But I did see in several of our deeds, additional conditions to the transfer. So I don't know, Brad, if you had more comments on that.
No, that's helpful. Like the note regarding Cook, other things. So I can start seeing what we have, at least in our files. And I think you're giving me too much credit, Tom, in terms of my knowledge in this area. I am not an open space manager expert. Unfortunately, the places I've been, it wasn't as big of a priority, I would say, as it is in Lancaster, and that's a good thing for Lancaster. So my concerns when I have run into it is making sure that we don't make rules and regulations that conflict with state statute, going above and beyond what's really within the commission's control. As well as, when it comes to hunting, I can tell you when I did serve on a conservation commission, I ran into this where at least to me, it seemed very clear that a butter had an agenda to the issue and just didn't want people on the open space, and hunters were accessing the open space either next to or very close to that homeowner's residence. And there was quite a bit of push for the commission to further control access and restrictions and limiting gun use on the parcel for that reason, which I didn't think appropriate, frankly. I didn't think it's really something the commission needs to be concerned with to go above and beyond gun control, for instance. But at the same time, there are instances where rules and regs do make sense. I struggled with it in a few instances. One of the things that I worked on was, some islands, for instance, on a pretty popular lake that got a lot of visitors and unfortunately not the best users of it, that weren't taking care of it, and it was causing a lot of harm. So I struggled with controlling that within state statute limits, making sure we treaded that fine line of allowing the use while not prohibiting something, unnecessarily. And at the end of the day on that one, fortunately, a couple of bald eagles took up residence and we just disallowed people from using it entirely. So it got protected for a different reason, but there is a lot to think about. There's very good reasons for it. I hope to dive more into that. Frankly, that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to Lancaster, because it's nice to have that conservation group and the effort in the open space where it's a priority, versus, the flip side where it's just, well, the commission needs to be there because of the Wetlands Protection Act, and that's it. So I'm excited about that part of it. I'm not an expert on it by any means at this point. I've got some knowledge and I hope to gain a lot more on it as we move through the process.
Commissioners, any further comments or questions? All right, moving on then. Next up on the agenda was minutes to approve. I don't think that we got drafts for these. Is that correct, Brad?
That is correct. I did take a cursory look at them. There are a few corrections that I do want to make before circulating that to the commission.
Okay. And that completes our agenda. Does anyone have anything else they want to talk about tonight? Not seeing anything. Happy to take motion to adjourn.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
I second it.
Motion was made by Dennis, seconded by Carl to adjourn the meeting. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle. Jim, you're on mute. Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.